Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are, Team Krulak community, and we're excited to bring you another special episode of the Brewcast, where we're still here on location at Swedish Defence University in Stockholm in Sweden as part of the Future Leaders Conference. But during our time here, we've had a chance to meet with a number of individuals outside the conference and get some more insights into a number of different themes and aspects that, in terms of everything from professional military education to using wargaming to pursue training and educational opportunities, and some incredible insights from the different speakers here. It's been a fantastic experience. But we're sitting here for another very interesting individual who we've had a chance to meet, and this is as part of our wargaming exploration here with what the Swedish Defence University is doing with their own game version for their own professional military education. And this is take 2 of this episode, so we're crossing our fingers that all of our devices will work the whole time this time. But as we were just discussing, we think this might actually work out for the best, because we've had some time to think about some more detail and some more questions to really explore the very interesting work that our guest is doing. Before we start, as always, remember that all opinions expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Krulak Center, Marine Corps University, the United States Marine Corps, the Swedish Defence University, or any other agency or entity affiliated with the U.S. or Swedish governments. So, in the room today on the Krulak Center side, you have myself, Major Ian Brown, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. We also have Lieutenant Colonel Curtis Kobeck, who is our Operations and Outreach Officer at the Krulak Center. And our guest today is Patrik Hulterström, who has had a very varied military career inside the Swedish military, but he's actually here as a PhD student, which is kind of going to be the focus of our discussion today. So, Patrik, again, thank you for taking more time out for us to try and get this one right. We definitely appreciate it. And first, I guess if we'll take it from the top, like we said, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, tell us what your military background and experience was with the Swedish military before you came here as a PhD student.
Yeah, okay. Happy to be here. It's really interesting and fun to talk about. And I'll start with myself. I went into the military in 1994 as a conscript, as a coastal ranger. So I did 14 months of conscript training as a soldier, and then I ended up as a conscript sergeant at the end. And I then went into officers training straight after that for 2 years. And when I came out, I applied and got selected for recon diver training. And so I went into recon diver training and worked as a recon diver officer after that. I also did a tour in Kosovo with another recon unit. And then I was later assigned as a platoon commander at the military academy. And from there I got recruited to become a teacher in naval and amphibious tactics at the Swedish Defence University. And that is when I started working with wargames and introducing wargames into the educational program for our officers training at our cadets. And I studied on the side, and I got a master's in philosophy because I was interested in getting an academic career while I was working at the university. So then I later applied for a PhD, become a PhD student, and I got accepted in Åbo Academy in Finland, because at that time the Swedish Defence University didn't have their own PhD program, but it was activated a couple of years later. So I started as an PhD student at Åbo Academy, but financed by the Swedish Defence University. So that's where I'm now, and this is my last year, so I'm trying to finish up my dissertation at this point.
Yeah, that's the big goal, right? Get that thing across the finish line. So let's talk about your dissertation, because in our discussions before we sat down to do this, we learned that your dissertation is on wargaming. However, it's taking a very unique approach to a discipline that you would not necessarily associate with philosophy, and the questions that you're trying to sort of answer as well in the context of wargaming, as a lot of us kind of think of it, are very, very unique as well. So what is it you're exploring in your dissertation, your PhD? What is the question you're trying to answer, and what's the approach you're taking to it?
So yeah, the question I'm trying to answer is actually whether and how war games can facilitate the development of tactical proficiency. So that is what I'm looking at. And I mean, at first take, you see that the problem is intrinsically empirical in every sense, so that you might wonder why you take a philosophical approach to it, but I'll try to explain that. But the thing is that although the problem is practical, or is a practical problem, there are almost no empirical investigations into the wargaming, actually, and how it works. And the lack of empirical research is perhaps not too surprising, as direct studies of things that has to do with the practice of warfare, especially force employment, are bound with numerous challenges, both practical and ethical, I would say. But at the same time, wargaming is also a theoretically underdeveloped field of research. There's very little theories about how it works. Most literature that exists, they seem to assume that the prolonged use of wargames proves that they can be used for learning about warfare. That's basically what most scholars and academics that write about it seem to suggest. And only a handful of scholars actually provide any substantial thoughts on how wargames work. And as I see it, since ideas about how to investigate the learning effects of wargames are dependent on conceptions about wargames, how wargames work as learning mechanisms or tools, it's also reasonable to think that the scarcity of empirical research, at least to some extent, is a consequence of this theoretical underdevelopment that exists within the field. And theories and conceptualizations are primarily results of thought processes, and this is where philosophy comes in, because as theories and conceptualizations are a result of thought process, and together with the problem of whether and how wargames function as learning mechanisms also have epistemological roots. That is why I turned to philosophy, because philosophy is a field of study that deals with clarifying thought processes, sharpening concepts, and also with epistemology. So that's the kind of connection there.
Okay, so let's get, I guess, kind of more into the construct of the theory that you're looking at, and I think this is kind of where we got to yesterday before my stuff died. So you'd mentioned using a conceptual analysis that sort of had three different parts to it in terms of building this out. So maybe you could go through and describe what the overview of your conceptual analysis, and then what the parts of it are that are helping you try and construct this theory.
Yeah, so the first one, like my main contribution with the dissertation is to present a tenable conceptual framework for explaining how wargames work as learning tools or learning mechanisms. And the first thing I ran into there is to try to understand then what is a tenable conceptual framework or a tenable theory. Then I would say it is a theory or conceptual framework that is epistemically acceptable and in a sense. And then traditionally, what is seen to be epistemic acceptable is epistemic acceptability derives from truth. That's the kind of traditional thing. That's when we talk about knowledge and stuff, we're usually associated with truth. But that view is actually kind of problematic. As philosopher Catherine Elgin points out, is that if absolute truth is necessary for epistemic acceptability, then the epistemic achievements of science and most other epistemic enterprises must be discarded, because they are often achieved using, strictly speaking, false means. Means such as idealizations, thought experiments, simplified theories and models, or what Elgin calls felicitous falsehoods or useful falsehoods. So if you want to have truth be the kind of backbone, it doesn't really work, because then we have to discard everything that we think that we know, actually, in a sense. An example is that, like in economics, it's generally accepted that if the price of a commodity increases, all other things being equal, the commodity demand will decrease. I mean, that's a kind of very simplified way of understanding things. But it's useful for understanding economics, but it's not strictly speaking true.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of other things affecting the price and demand and so on. So that's just an example of all these useful falsehoods that we use.
So I guess if we can't sort of go the route of absolute truth as the baseline for approaching it, what is your approach then?
That's the interesting part, and that's where her epistemology comes in here, where she develops a kind of a new way of looking at it. So to make room for all these falsehoods then, and how you gain knowledge through the more understanding, as she calls it, is that she uses a holistic epistemology that acknowledges that the tenable theories and conceptual frameworks must be tethered to the phenomenon they concern, but she denies that it's the truth is the sole acceptable tether for this. And she develops this further, and she argues that although models and idealizations and thought experiments are inaccurate, they exemplify features they share with the target, and thereby afford epistemic access to aspects of their targets that are otherwise overshadowed or underemphasized. So, and in this sense, she says they are true enough. So that's what, instead of truth, she talks about true enough. And that they advance an understanding of the phenomenon they bear on. Because here, the thing is that she tries to move away from knowledge and these kinds of stuff in favor of understanding. So that's what she talks about. So because knowledge is usually associated with truth and so on. I'm not really ready to accept that kind of sidelining knowledge as a concept altogether, because that makes it quite hard for me to discuss these things later on in the dissertation. But I still kind of recognize her epistemology, and that's what kind of thing I'm following. But then the question is, what makes something true enough? And following Elgin then, the epistemic acceptability of a commitment that it is true enough cannot be determined by itself. And here's why she makes a distinction between knowledge and understanding, because knowledge is kind of it comes in grains. I mean, you say you come to know a fact and so on, and she says that this is not how we really come to know a subject or a topic or anything, because we come to know it as a constellation of mutually supportive commitments, kind of attaining to this topic. So, and a constellation of mutually supportive commitments is an account that is what she calls in reflective equilibrium, because all the ideas and things that kind of builds up this framework or conceptual idea has to be connected in some way and support each other, even though each individual part can be a bit sketchy, like using these kind of falsehoods we were talking about before, but together they kind of help us understand the subject much better. So, and that's also the method I'm using, this reflective equilibrium. I try to kind of what I'm trying to do is that I try to bring existing ideas about wargames, the few that exists, into reflective equilibrium, into a framework that is of mutually supportive commitments, by refining and adding to these existing ideas, building on them, using other theories, within other fields, especially philosophy. And when I look at the literature, I can identify three major conceptual elements or parts in existing theories about wargames, and those are ideas about how wargames can generate learning. There are ideas about how the learning is to be described epistemically, and there is ideas about how the learning is to be epistemically evaluated, because all these three are kind of important parts, and that what I can identify in the literature, that's what they try to describe. But in my opinion, I don't think they really get there, because they have a lot of interesting ideas and a lot of interesting notions, but they don't really explore them fully, and they don't use the kind of broad ideas that I'm looking into. And I try to refine and add to these ideas to form three concepts that together come together as a conceptual, mutually supportive framework. That's the idea. And I call these three concepts the generative concept, the epistemic concept, and the evaluative concept. And very kind of briefly, if I describe this, the generative concept explains wargaming experience by distinguishing between the fictional facts describing the imaginary world of the wargame and the fictional tactical problems and challenges that emerge in this imaginary world. So this is a very important distinction for me. And this goes very well together with the epistemic concept that I developed that explains tactical proficiency by making a distinction between the factual knowledge and the know-how involved in doing tactics. Because, I mean, knowing tactics, we all know that there's a lot of facts that we need to know to be good tacticians about the weapons, about sensors, everything, formations, you can name them all. But there's also a know-how component to it, I would say, and I think that's almost even more important, understanding how these different facts come together to help us, or how to understand what to do on the battlefield, to get things right on the battlefield, citing another philosopher, Ryle, that I use a lot, that makes a distinction between knowledge that and knowledge how, because that's he makes a big important distinction there between, and it's a and that's very important for me in my dissertation as well, this distinction.
Okay, so you noted that there was not a lot of existing theory to really kind of draw from initially to help you build this out. But wargaming, depending on how you want to categorize it, you could it goes back at least a couple hundred years to the initial Prussian Kriegspiel and all the developments from that. Or you could argue, depending on some of the more not simplistic, but the more abstract games like chess or Go, or other sort of simple tabletop games that go back hundreds of thousands of years. Why do you think there hasn't been a deeper exploration up to this point? If you had a few thousand years to start looking at it, didn't happen. But even if you go back a couple hundred years, when it really started getting looked at as a key instructional tool for the military. Thinker and executor of military policies and policies given from political leadership. Why is it the theory? This thing's been around for a while. Why hasn't the theory why didn't it follow, or why did it not lead?
It's a good question. I haven't really found why. I would say I can just kind of see that it doesn't exist really in that sense. There are a few theories. I mean, that are quite new. I mean, Peter Perla has wrote his very important book on the subject on wargaming, and that one is very important for me as well. And I think he has a lot of brilliant ideas in there that I think just needs to be kind of explored a little bit further to kind of make the point in a sense. And then there's also the British scholar Philip Sabin that's written about wargames and how they work. They have a lot in common, but there is also differences between them. But I think those are the ones that kind of explore it more. And I think both of them have a more strict view on what a wargame is. I think they more think about the Kriegspiel system as a wargame, as opposed to this other view where wargame is like old as war itself. Like Martin van Crefeld, that's the kind of view he endorses in his book about war games. But I mean, he's a military historian as well, so it's not that strange that he finds war game as old as war itself. I mean, but he has a very wide understanding of war games. I mean, anything from judicial combat to gladiator games, or even martial arts training would in some sense fit his description of a war game, and that doesn't really help, I would say. As a philosopher, I would say that is a too broad of a concept.
Yeah, everything is wargaming.
Yeah, exactly. Everything is wargaming. Then, if everything is, then nothing is. So I think this more precise definition of wargames is a better way of approaching it. And I also think that we might need to kind of have complementary definitions within overarching definition of wargames as well for looking at specific wargames. Like I'm interested in wargames that are what's happening on the battlefield, on the tactics. That's what I'm interested in. So I think I also suggest in my dissertation a complementary definition of tactical wargames, or educational tactical wargames, as I call them.
That leads into it's not really a question, but I guess it's an internal point of contention of, what is a war game and how do you categorize it? And I think Peter Perla tried to grapple with that, and I've read lots of other books and pieces. But I know back at Marine Corps University, we've even in the last couple of years, we tried to find a definition because General Berger came on board, laid out that we should all do more wargaming of different types to include military education. And, the university, sort of called the banners and assembled the team and to include the wargaming experts we already had on staff, and tried to lay out like a detailed plan of like, all right, so we need to do more. Let's, as we do, start with definition and then we'll move on to like the detailed plan. But then just starting with that definition became an immediate point of contention because where do you draw it from? Do you draw it from Peter Perla? Do you draw it from how the Commandant described it in his guidance? Do you draw it from, there was a RAND report on wargaming in the Marine Corps that came out right before the planning guidance. It had its own set of definitions, and one draft included that definition, and then one of the other wargamers from the university was like, no, that's not a good definition. So what do you do? So do you have some of the categories that you've laid out? Like maybe if we could at least add them to the
I go through like 6 different definitions of wargames in my dissertation, and I look at Martin van Krefeld's, Peter Perla's, a guy called John Peterson that's written a quite interesting definition in a book. What is it's called now? I can't remember. But okay, it's an anthology, so there's a lot of different people writing it. But I found it very useful, his definition, and then also Philip Sabin, of course, and then Matthew Caffrey and his and then Joint Planning Directive that also has a definition. I go through those, and I find like 3 things that they all have in common, and I would say that they all think that wargame is something that is make-believe. It's something that requires contradicting objectives between the players, and then also a player effort. It's very important that you have a player effort, that you do something in this game. It's not just like you don't run just a simulation and get an answer. It's just you have to do something to affect what's happening in the war game. And from these 3, I then myself developed these, and I discussed them, and I find that there's something else you need to add to these different parts to get a more full description of wargame. And then I also kind of make it more precise, so I can give you my definition of educational wargames that I use in my dissertation, and that is that...
Would love to have it.
Yeah, wargames in the educational tactical wargame format is an abstract battle that allows the players to assume the control of make-believe forces in a make-believe battlefield environment, thereby functioning as learning mechanism by exemplifying the experience of tactical command or doing tactics, that is, organizing and maneuvering military forces against an opponent on the battlefield.
Okay. Hey, well, we will take that, and we will add that to the body, or to the definitions. And actually, I'm generally interested in we take this back, and once we post this and share it, I'm going to point this towards our various resident wargamers at the university and be like, gentlemen, what are your thoughts? And there might be actually some opportunity to connect them with you if you're not speaking to them already. But
not yet. I mean, this is not. I haven't really finished my dissertation yet, so this is still a draft.
Sure. Yeah.
So I don't know if this is gonna be in the last or if it's gonna change or something. But I mean, it's my definition as it stands right now, and I think I've been working on it for a while, so I think it will be staying with me, but I'm not sure. But I'm happy to discuss it with anyone who wants to know. As I see it, I don't think it's perfect, because I don't even know if there's something like a perfect definition ever.
Well, I mean, I've heard there's some sort of joke where like you bring 6 wargamers together and ask them to define wargaming, you get like 13 definitions. So
yeah.
Yeah, there may never be a perfect one, but I think the fact that you're actively, doing research on this area and you've crafted a definition to support that, I think that gives it currency, right? And I think it's worth sharing and talking about. And I know at a minimum, our wargaming director would probably like to, love to hear the definition and then learn more about your research as it unfolds. So I guess with the finishing the dissertation, then what is your so sort of once you're done, and I guess dissertations are not done, they're just turned in. Is that right?
They are abandoned.
They're abandoned. Yes, that's it. Once you sort of hit that point, what is your goal for the next step? Like, what do you want to take your work and do with it in the realm of wargaming going forward, or at least in military educational wargaming?
I would really like to continue working with wargames and producing new wargames and using them in our education of officers. And also I would like to, do more research on it. And especially now I have a philosophical approach, and I would love to start trying to use this in a more empirical studies on wargames. But since this is what I've been kind of looking for myself, is a more of a complete theory, or not complete, but a theory about war games and how they work, because I think that's necessary to even be able to try to study it more empirically. So that would be my next step, try to find ways of studying it more, perhaps more indirectly, in the sense how people kind of relate to war games, how they use them, how it develops their ability to think tactically and reason about tactics and so on. So that's probably where I will go next after this.
Yeah, and I think that would be a hugely valuable contribution, because we talked yesterday or the day before. I've sort of lost all track of time. But to your point, like, war games validity seems to be because it's been used for a long time, but there's no data set that you can point to and say, this is how it works, this is my control group or it doesn't, like, and I can prove it to you. And I think that would go a tremendous way in one, reinforcing what we all think here is like the value of wargaming, because we sort of assume that it's apparent, but it may not always be apparent. And that leads into the next thing, which is, as institutions try and convince, get themselves to do more wargaming, there are some people who you're going to have to convince along the way who do not see inherent value in it. Not through any fault of their own per se, but because it's not a tool they've used or familiar with. And being able to come with data and evidence, certainly helps with that convincing process. So you can have something to point to rather than just be like, well, we've always done it, which I think part of the discussion at this conference here is like, that's not the right answer. If we're going to be adaptive learning in military institutions to deal with future challenges, just that's how we've always done it. So it's not good enough. So being able to back that up is, I think can be very valuable. I don't want to take too much more time, because we do have other things to get to, but I realize we didn't start off with kind of an overview of what Swedish Defence University is doing with educational wargaming for the officers who come through here. So I think it'd be a huge benefit. We all saw the thing yesterday, but to share that to a wider audience, can you kind of just quickly describe what your program of wargaming here is for the officers, a little bit of how it started maybe, and then sort of talk about the specific game you use, which we saw yesterday.
Yeah, sure. And that's all connected for us in a sense, because the wargaming engine that we call it, that we use, it was started as a research project, and it still is an ongoing research project. But it started as a project with a PhD student actually that developed it for. He was looking at how people make decisions, so he used that. So he used experienced Swedish officers to make decisions in this wargaming, and that's what he studied. So that's how he started. And then after he was done with his PhD, he started to develop this project into a more useful war game that you could use in education. That was at least the idea, and that's where I came into it, because I was asked to become a subject matter expert on amphibious warfare in this war game, and that's how I got in contact with it. And when I saw it, I was just about to set up to create a course in tactics, naval and amphibious tactics, for our Swedish cadets here at school, and I saw it and okay, this is great. I want to use this in my course.
Yeah.
And that's how it started. So then the development of the wargame engine kind of followed that. It was kind of catered for my course.
Okay.
In a sense. And then when I started using that, and then it was really popular with the cadets. They thought it was great. And it was really interesting because, I mean, I had done the same course the year before without the game, and then I did it with the game for several years, and I could see a big difference in how the cadets was reasoning about tactics and about things that was happening on the battlefield in a way that I didn't see before we used the war game. So that was really interesting and encouraging for me to keep using the war game. And then I developed other courses along the way where we put this into the training as well with all the cadets. So now, at this point, we use the wargame in all 4 tactics courses we have during the program with our naval and amphibious cadets. So we have the same wargame engine, but different scenarios, and adding to these scenarios for each course, making it more and more difficult, more and more complex for each time.
Yeah. Yeah, seeing that in the briefing yesterday, that sort of stair-step approach was, that I think we discussed, like, that's what we've been asked for, like, from student feedback on our end. Like, we need it more, we need it at the beginning, and then we can get better at it as we go through the curriculum. So I guess the game, if you could just describe it real quickly, what we saw yesterday, computer-based game, basic mapping engine, and then what are some of the functionalities that you've built into it?
It's a computer game with continuous time. So, I mean, we can set the time so it can go faster also if we need, because a lot of times we have seen that it's, I mean, for us it's really important that it's continuous time when we're doing tactics for training, because there's a lot of things happening at the same time. And part of know-how in tactics, as I see it, is this seeing these timings and seeing these things happening all the time. I mean, and so we have that, and we can accelerate the time when things are going really slow during operations, so we can actually try to capture an entire operation that is several days within a much narrower time space. So that's the idea. And then also, I mean, the fog of war is a really good thing that you can really get the impression of in a digital war game, because you cannot tune in things to just show what the sensors see and nothing else. So you can't. I mean, you only see where you have your units and their sensors, and so that's a really good part of it as well. I would say. And then, I mean, we can add to these all different kind of weapons and so on. And I mean, the entire environment is what we call a sandbox environment, where we can build almost any kind of entity that we want. I mean, it's just a design decision. What is the abstraction level, for instance, of a unit? Should should we represent the company, or should we represent the individual platoons or the squads within this company, and so on? So I mean, and we can also, I mean, split things. I mean, if you have a company, okay, this tank company is really important as a tank company, but then there's these kind of other units that are really important as squads and or something, then we represent them as that, because that's necessary to kind of, create those problems and challenges that we want them to face on the battlefield.
Yeah, so a lot of tailorability, customization.
Yeah, it's a lot of tailorability and customization, and also that's how we go about when we kind of set up these war games. Is that there's a lot of trial and error in making these things. So we use a lot of officers to come and try the war game before, and they give their opinion to us about how they think it works. And I think that's also one of the things I take up in my dissertation, is that the feedback from experienced officers is really important for building a good war game, because those are the ones that can recognize the problems and challenges that are relevant on the battlefield. Yeah,
absolutely. And we got some great feedback yesterday when we put those board games out on the table, in terms of political borders and MSRs and stuff. So that didn't come here necessarily looking for that deliberately, but that was definitely great feedback, and I'm going to send back to the game designers and tell them, Norway's not annex anything, folks. You may want to take a look at where you're drawing your map lines. Colonel Kovac, did you have any other questions?
you started to answer it, so it may be redundant, but as you help develop a deeper understanding of wargaming, how do you see this enabling wargaming in the future? And I'm thinking like from the designer to the educators to the players themselves. Have you thought about how this will enable the future of wargaming?
Yeah, I think so. I'm hoping that my dissertation can provide a better understanding of wargame, even though I don't think it's the complete understanding. I think there's a lot more to learn about it, but I think this is a first step towards this. So I think it can help both designers and scholars on wargaming in how to think about this and how we might go about investigating it in the future, not only to kind of prove that wargaming works, but also that how we can make it better. So I think that's an important part. And I also think it's important for players because, as I see it, a very important thing in wargaming is that you have players that understand how wargaming works for wargaming to be really effective. And
Yeah.
Interesting, I had a colleague that he wrote his dissertation on this, what we call gamer mode. And it's something that we talk about a lot about in Sweden when we use wargaming in our education. And that's just informing the players that, I mean, gamer mode is when the players start playing the game for the game itself, trying to find these shortcuts and things that are possible in the game that doesn't necessarily is how things would be in real life, and you wouldn't do these things in real life. So they're kind of using gaps in the wargaming that the designers wasn't. The designers did never thought this would happen. But
Yeah.
they use that to win the game, so they're playing to win, and that's really really bad for using wargaming as learning tools. Is that you don't take it seriously and try to see what it actually is that you can learn. So we talk about it a lot with our cadets, and the interesting thing about that is that they correct themselves when they're starting to behave like this, or they see their colleagues behave like in a certain way. They say, "No, that's not okay. That's gamer mode. Stop it."
Interesting. I'm going to take. We can
Sounds
take
like
gamer.
identification of that, yeah.
Yeah, we can take gamer mode back and start slapping our students on the wrist and be like, "No, you're in gamer mode. You need to get in professional mode here."
Yeah.
All right, one last question for you, and then we'll wrap it up. Which is, aside from the war game that your team has built and run here for the officers, what is your favorite war game to play, or your favorite game?
Oh,
I know it's hard to pick.
I mean, I'm a gamer, so I play a lot of games actually. So I don't know what would be the best. We were talking about it yesterday.
We were not the best, but like, what's your go-to?
No, but that one was I really like it. I mean, XCOM and
Yeah.
XCOM 2. I really like those games. I think they're really fun to play. I have 4 teenage boys at home, so I mean they play a lot of video games and computer games. So I've been playing a lot of League of Legends with them as well, and it's a frustrating game in many ways, but also kind of fun. But I guess
Yeah, well, so is XCOM, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. So
No, great. I know it's hard to pick one. I think when we had this conversation, I started listing like 5, and then I had to stop because we had to eat. Great. Well, thank you very much, Patrik, again for your time. We successfully recorded this, so I'm going to try and take this and edit it and get it out over the next couple of days here, so that we can share your insights with our educational community of interest, but also the wider network we're plugged into. Because one of the best parts about this trip has been coming and seeing the really good, unique things that other groups and other people are doing in the same area that we all have interest in. So I think we've learned a tremendous amount, and this is just one more piece that we can take and help inform the wider community and make ourselves better and make the rest of our community better as well. So thank you very much.
thank you.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.